Hey, everybody, it's Kevin and Marina from RPH Ally and the Herbalism Show, where I've got our star over here that is showing me all the different hairstyles you can use. My hair always looks like this, very boring. I wish it was more stylish. I'll try for that later, Marina. Maybe you can give me some tips about what's real.
Maybe some herbs, Kevin.
So, hair herbs is the show today.
That'll be another episode.
So this one is about bridging the gap between herbs and medicine. And interestingly, I'm very thankful for my dear colleague. She joined me at Washington State University the other day, go Cougs. And Marina went over the things that she's doing from a telepharmacy standpoint and doing things at Raw Fork to be able to connect the dots for all those folks that need additional help on functional medicine, herbalism, et cetera, to be able to help them across, state borders and have a network inside of there. And also to go over the importance of culture in medicine. And it ties in really well with our topic today, Marina, because the group we were talking to for me was my Native American health sciences crew. And it was students from doctors and nurses and professors and adjunct faculty and pharmacy students. They were all in there and really interested to hear more about how do we weave these things together, because we're failing to do so. And I know you and I have said the exact same thing about herbs and medicine. Like we just don't do well. So how do we bridge that gap?
Yeah, absolutely. And we were just chatting about, there's multiple gaps that we can talk about when it comes to how does medicine relate to herbalism and vice versa, and what's our relationship to viewing herbs as medicine, or what medicine even is. So there is a gap, right? Either way you look at it, where we're using plants, right, as the foundation of our food, hopefully. And because we're using it for food, they have beneficial qualities for us. So we can talk about herbs as something that provides basic building blocks for our cells, right? Fuel and macro and micronutrients for us. So there's a category of herbs that is known as the nutrient dense herbs or food like herbs. So that's something that is more like a food than a medicine, right? But it is also something that we need to feed our bodies and our cells so that we can survive. So if our cells aren't getting enough fuel, then that could be medicinal for us to get those extra vitamins and minerals and nutrients. Then there's
thought about it that way, Marina.
Yep.
I'm so glad you said that, because I was just kind of open up my mind to go, we all take these highly condensed multivitamins that the absorption rates are very poor. We're taking those and they're quite expensive. And you just said something that made my head go like this, because I thought, wow, why couldn't we just do that with herbs and actually get the full benefits of those things, replacing a multivitamin to keep us healthy? So can you talk just a little bit more about that? Because I love that topic.
Yeah, that's exactly what herbalism really is. It's about actually keeping the substances that we are ingesting in their more natural, crude, raw form. Now, we do sometimes extract them, like I mentioned, with making a tea out of them or making a tincture out of them or powdering up the herbs so that it's just more convenient for us to consume it, and sometimes very tasty as well. We can also just literally eat it as a food, and it can be medicinal for us by providing us that multivitamin sort of whole food nutrition.
You just bridged a gap for me, just thinking about going, here's your multivitamins, Kevin, that you were always used to in the pharmacy, in the hospital, everywhere else, giving your patients, and here are your medicines. Just instead of a multivitamin, we're using herbs to be able to fill all those gaps in and pull those nutrients and general phytochemicals together. And I think there's one gap Rena just closed in under 4 minutes.
That's one gap. And then we also have two other classes of herbs. So I think about them in these three broad categories. So one is the nutrient dense that we just discussed, the food like. Yep. The second class is more of where I think about them as something specific that they're doing medicinally. They're supporting some sort of system, helping us balance something out in our body, correcting a deficit or some sort of function that is not operating 100%. So we are using it for a very specific therapeutic purpose in that second category. And that's where we have to be a little bit more careful. So it's not just like, oh, it's a safe food, you can consume as much as you want, and you don't really have to worry about the safety. But the second class is now you're gonna start to look at what's the dosage that we need to be consuming, how should this be prepared, which part of the plant is traditionally used, because we are using it in a very specific medicinal therapeutic indication way. So
Yeah.
it now changes from just being like a food and supportive and building to something that we are specifically have to be monitoring now. So we're monitoring the safety always, that comes first, and then secondly the efficacy. So there's actually a great graphic that Kevin found, where this is another gap, right? So drug interactions is something that we always have to watch out for. So when we are using plants, either as food or as medicine, we always have to see, are we inadvertently causing any sort of dysfunction or interaction that we're not aware of? Because again, there's a gap of what clinicians know, what the prescribers know, what even pharmacists know about drugs. And then sometimes the patients don't tell us what herbs or plants that they're eating or consuming or what supplements they're on. So that's another knowledge deficit and gap that we have to be bridging. We have to be talking to them both about what foods and herbs they're consuming potentially. And they might not even realize it, right? If they're eating a ton of cinnamon on the daily, they don't consider that as a medicine.
No.
But yes, spices can sometimes also be medicinal, and they can also have both a therapeutic effect, and therefore, by extension, it might have a toxic effect if you take too much or you are taking it in conjunction with something that makes it more potent or the opposite.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I love that because you broke down, here's herbs as a food or a supplement. Potentially, here's the highly nutrient dense components of herbalism. Here's the components of herbalism that are therapeutic. And then the graphic you're breaking down there, I mean, things like coffee and lavender and grapefruit, like I don't think of those as being medicines immediately, even though lavender, I've seen it utilized fairly successfully in lots of long-term care settings, helping with sundowners and other things. But the thing that they mentioned in there, Marina, I love that you're closing this gap too when you said it. A ton of, you said someone eating a ton of cinnamon. And it's so easy for us to be able to go, oh no, I can't have that herb with my medicine. And the gap that you're closing is that's not true.
yeah.
You just, there are certain thresholds that you can't cross. Grapefruit's the same. You get everybody coming in and saying, oh no, I can't use the grape. I can never eat grapefruit for the rest of my life because I was put on a statin, or I can never take my melatonin any longer because I'm using lavender. There's so many misconceptions of just their thresholds when it comes to how much consumption level there is. And how do people figure those things out, Marina, when they're trying to close that gap in those interactions? Like, how did you first do it?
Yeah, so it's just like in medicine, in pharmaceutical medicine and drugs, we talk about dosage, we talk about narrow therapeutic index and side effect profiles. Same thing with plants. We have to realize, first of all, categorize it as, either what's the safety margin, right? So is it a food like category? Is it a medicinal category that we have to monitor more closely? Or this third category, which I didn't mention yet, which is very narrow therapeutic index, or poisonous plants, right? So that you kind of don't want any contact with. Sometimes it's topical, right? Like poison ivy or poison oak. So you have to be aware of some plants that are never good for you, right? Or just have such a narrow threshold that you just might as well not really interact with it. So that's important to know, like locally, right? If you're just going to be hiking or just walking around in your garden or a forest area, or your kids are playing around, we should always be aware of that. But that's not to say we should be afraid of nature and of all plants. We just need to see those things for what they are. So sometimes they're medicinal for our health, sometimes they're nutrients, so we need to eat them to live. And then sometimes, yes, you do want to watch out for certain things. So those are like the three big categories that I always want to educate on. And then for the medicinal one, which is like the really exciting category for us as pharmacists and clinicians, to answer your question, It's just like getting to know the plant. So it's getting to know the history, right, of how it was historically used, which part of the plant. Again, not every part is created equal. Not every part has the same constituents in that part. And then how you want to ingest those certain phytochemicals. Either, just by eating it, will you activate it? Do you need a water or an alcohol or an oil soluble form of that? Or do you need that, supplement form because you really just can't get enough in the plant? So there's all these things that we can study about plants, and we get to use the history behind them and the traditional uses, as well as any references, clinical studies, scientific literature, in vitro, in vivo, to inform us of that. And another classic interaction example I just want to bring up for you as a food and potentially herb with a drug interaction is warfarin, right? It's such a classic where we know about vitamin K. And it's not to say like somebody can never have, kale or broccoli or spinach, but we have to make sure they know that it's an interaction and they need to be consistent with whatever they're having. So, and also clinically, right? If they're taking St. John's wort, which is another thing most pharmacists know has a lot of interactions, what drugs are we worried about clinically about, right? So it's the serotonergic drugs, and then it's also the immunosuppressant drugs if somebody really needs to be on it. So it really depends on, the clinical significance of that interaction, and then also the dose, right? So how much will really make a difference.
Yeah. And I guess that's the one that's always interesting to me, Marina. Like I would literally, as a student, I remember the pharmacy director would say, "Hey, Kevin, you're going to go up and you're going to educate every patient leaving on warfarin." So I had this little booklet. I went up there and I was trying to be as friendly as I could be and go through the booklet. And then the green leafy vegetable kind of thing hit. They were always nervous, like, "Oh man, I love salad." So I was always trying to tell them, like, "No, it's something you have to just do consistently, etc." And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, what does that even mean, Kevin? Like, what do you mean, like consistent eating? Do you eat consistently? No, you don't. Like, there's just so much variability. So when it comes to just that monitoring component, Marina, for you, because I think that is a great example you brought up, because we talk about that all the time at the counter, when we're dispensing warfarin, to tell them about the green leafy vegetables. We probably should be talking more about proteins as well with protein binding, but we won't use that for this episode. But when it comes to like thresholds for individuals and comfort levels for providers, the one thing that we have for comfort is predictable dosing, right? Within herbs. Do you feel like there's the way for us to be able to look at, here's the interaction, like thresholds and parameters that we have in literature already provided for us, and this is the dosing form to keep it as controlled as possible? Because if I took a pill for green leafy vegetables, a vitamin K, for example, right? I could control it. Like I can control how much vitamin K is going to the body. When I'm eating a salad, I can't have as much control. So how do we bridge that gap, Marina? Like that one for me, like that's the personal like difficulty on bridging, is understanding controlled, maybe not as beneficial, to less controlled, but potentially it can be easy enough to do and calculate.
Yeah, I think we feel good. Like what you said really makes sense. We do feel good when we have that level of control, which is why, makes us more confident clinically to know the drug, to know the dosing, and to even do like a TPN for somebody, and to be able to calculate everything. And when we compound, so it's nice and neat, but unfortunately we're not robots. So we can't always 100% calculate things and then know what the body will even do with those things. So there's just so much in between that happens, and even our state of mind and our, environment can play a role to what the body starts doing. And so the good news about plants, right? It is scary that we can't control as much, but the good news is they're more forgiving when you take the whole plant form in whatever is studied, historically as being fairly safe and replicable, right? So if somebody is consistently has recorded data or, clinical experience that this is what they give to their clients, and this is fairly safe and what's seen across the board, no toxic effects. So it's kind of more forgiving. And so we really have to look at the history more than the calculations when we're talking about whole plant medicine.
Yes. That's really helpful. I mean, I think that, just looking at coffee, like coffee in the form of a brew, and grapefruit, often in like a juice form or just a whole fruit, there we can really say like, okay, how many glasses of grapefruit juice can you have? How many cups of coffee, can you have in general? And I know that, Marina, you already have in the back of your mind, like, oh, I know how many portions of these things will allow you to be able to break, down a successful clinical regimen. And how the rest of you can know that is you can jump on Marina's channel and get even more information from her on all the things that she's doing in the background behind herbalism. And on her channel, she'll give you more insights on how you can clinically feel more confident on the history of these individual plants and leveraging them in your clinical space. I think the most important thing to leave folks on is this, Marina. There are gaps, right? We know there are gaps between herbs and medicine, but that does not mean they're not worth closing for our patients. We talked about that yesterday together with the students and faculty at Washington State University to really go over why it matters to our patients to be more relevant to them culturally. And that is about really healing them. And sometimes the drugs that we're dispensing are not being taken at all. Like they're just going up on the shelf and hidden away. And so now we have to be able to find ways to connect with them. In some cultures and some folks, and I think there's probably more than we even know, that herbs matter. Like having herbs and utilizing something that really connects with them is a big deal. Any other parting words, Marina?
Love it. No, I think you just nailed it. So I'm complete.
All right. I love it. All right, everybody. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, Kevin.